Come on, Chris.
Hi, Dan. How are you?
Good, my man. Love the shirt.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm not quite as colorful as you are. So.
What? Oh, and it matches your glasses. It's a whole thing you got going on.
I have to make an effort. Obviously, I had to wear green, so.
So the green part is because he's originally Irish, still Irish, lives in Lisbon, writer, historian, got a podcast series, Ireland's Edge, as well as BBC New Generation Thinker. You've seen his writings in the Financial Times, Guardian, Irish Times, and others. But coming to this particular panel, chief analyst and co-author of Royal Historian Society's landmark report on race and gender inequality in history. So before we get to the deep stuff, quick question. You love Ireland, you have to, and everybody loves Ireland. I now love Estonia. Do you see any similarities between the two countries?
I do. We both have terrible weather.
Terrible weather?
Also,
okay.
Small countries on the edge of Europe.
Yes.
With original languages that nobody else in the world speaks. So, yeah, the Estonians are like the mirror image of us on the other side.
I love it. Excellent. You've been here before. You're not a stranger to this land. Have you met the panelists before?
I've been talking to them the last couple of days. We've had some great chats.
Okay.
So we'll try not to say any of the libelous things that we said off stage, on stage, but hopefully we'll have a good discussion. So.
But this is a brand new conversation. This is not something that you've had before, and we're copy pasting on Latitude.
No, we're doing this live.
We're doing this live. We're doing this here. And so with that, can you all please give a warm welcome again to the moderator, Chris, and to his panelists as they come on stage. Yeah, come on.
So thank you very much to Dan. Thank you all very much for coming, and thank you to my panelists, who I'm going to let introduce themselves in a minute. You can see our topic today is how do we make tech more inclusive and diverse? And I guess the reason that we're asking this question is because tech is not very inclusive and not very diverse. I'm a historian, as Dan said, and so it's been interesting for me the last couple of days to meet some really amazing people working on cool startups and in big tech companies and stuff. I normally work about the past, and these people are all talking about the future, which is really cool. A couple of people have tried to get me to invest in their startups, but I think they overestimate how much historians make. But one thing that I've been really interested in is the narrative that people tell about tech, about how it's this place where anybody can make it, anybody can have a great idea, start a company, change the world, make loads of money, but statistically that's not really true. Your chances of doing that if you're a woman or a person of color are way lower than they are, and the industry is still very much dominated by white men in many ways. So we're going to be asking why that is and how we can change it. I'm very pleased to have these three fascinating panelists with me, and rather than me reading off a list of their accomplishments and what they do, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. So Lisa, if you want to go first.
Yeah, hi, my name is Merle Lindma. I do work as a HR business partner for Microsoft. And my key focus areas every day is organization, talent management, leadership, and of course one of it is culture and being inclusive company.
Okay. Megan?
My name is Megan Riley. I worked the first half of my career in tech as an engineering manager, and then moved into executive coaching, which is what I do now, and a lot of passion still around this space.
Hi, I'm Charnez Jacobs, originally from Cape Town, South Africa, but based in Amsterdam now. I'm a venture capital investor at CapitalT. Also a fellow on a fellowship called Included VC, which is creating diversity in the venture capital industry.
Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you all very much for joining me. Now, as I mentioned, I'm a historian. I'm very interested in narratives that people tell, stories that people tell. And tech often tells a very positive, inspiring story about the ability of people to have great ideas and change the world, change their lives, and so on. But when you start looking at the statistics of who really is in positions of power, makes money, get investments, make investment decisions, and so on in tech, some of the figures are really shocking. Like compared to even many other sectors of the economy, it's somewhere that is still really struggling to make itself more diverse. Megan, do you think that to address these problems, rather than just acknowledging them, the bigger story needs to change?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We have a strong narrative in tech, and we can always point to examples. In Estonia, we have great examples of founders who are female, for example. But the truth is that on the ground, it's very hard. I mean, this notion of meritocracy really favors people who fit into the system the way the system currently exists. and that doesn't favor people of color, women. And I think that in order to change anything, you have to be honest about where you are, right? I think there's a reckoning that is happening, but it's not happening fast enough. The reckoning has to happen much more quickly, and we have to be more honest about, what we want out of this industry. And the impact it has, because it has a real impact to, we build software, we build it to, for the entire world, and yet it's not built by people who reflect the world. And we see that, we see that in AI models that are trained with the unconscious bias of the people who built them. All kinds of terrible examples of that have come up. The personal assistants that show up in our home, our Alexas, our Siris, our Cortanas, which always have a female voice and, have been trained to respond to abuse, in the same systematic way that women have had to adjust to kind of abusive language or situations at work as well. And I absolutely think we have to change the narrative and be honest about where we are in order to make things change. Yes.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, Charnez, you work in venture capital in an area where the statistics on lack of diversity, maybe rather than using the word diversity, maybe we should just say exclusion, racism, sexism, misogyny, are really shocking. I mean, many of you might have heard Michael Lintz's talk yesterday about how, of deals given to founders for new startups in Europe, 1% of them go to women, 1% of them go to black founders. That the dominance is almost extraordinary. So for you as a black man working in venture capital, do you think that the industry understands quite how bad the problem is, and how do we make them accept that?
Yeah, no, I think the industry itself, there's discussions going around it. And so sometimes there's these quotas and they're pushing for having certain diversity metrics, but they're missing the inclusion piece. And so that's something which there are some organizations like Included VC, where Microsoft's venture fund, Creandum, Seed Camp, Notion Capital have sponsored this initiative to try and sort of create more diverse fund managers and capital allocators themselves. Because the problem sort of starts with their decision-making, the investment decision-making process. If that doesn't change and that's not diverse and inclusive, we won't get inclusive investments happening, because those opportunities just won't be seen. And those voices onto the table to be involved in that investment decision-making process. Because sometimes, unfortunately, what happens is we'll hire sort of a diverse candidate for an investment role even, but unfortunately not included in an investment process. So it's still a discussion which needs to actively be had in the venture capital industry. But at the same time, one thing which concerns me is that sometimes venture capitalists themselves don't actually realize that investing in diverse founders is not charity. I'm not investing in a diverse team because I'm for charity or philanthropy. In order to get massive returns in venture capital, you need to be contrarian and you need to be right. So your team needs to be contrarian and think outside of the box and have diversity of thought. And when you invest like that, you're going to invest in opportunities which are outside of the box. So it's not that, for charity we need to have a diverse team. It's purely for return as well. We also need to have a diverse team.
Yeah. I mean, there's something very interesting. Megan, you mentioned the idea of meritocracy. I mean, we have study after study after study after study for decades that shows that more diverse teams with more diverse thinking and more diverse background perform better, do more interesting things, and so on. So it's not a case of these horrifying statistics underpinning a more profitable industry that we're trying to say needs to be less successful to be more diverse. It's a case of an industry that's been captured to a certain extent by people for whom the system works. And Lisa, you work in a very big corporation in Microsoft that has a equality and diversity commitment, that you monitor the diversity of your teams and everything. Do you feel that you still have to convince other people in your corporation that this is important and that this is not just, as Charnez said, something like that is just purely social, and it's also something that is actually integral to doing business well?
There were quite a number of questions. Microsoft has started to change when Satya Nadella took over, and we started our new way how we work, completely auditing what we have done and what we should do. And this is when we started to build up a different company. And what our culture is based on is growth mindset. It is that, yes, we learn. If we make a mistake, we say it and we learn. And at some point, we said, how do we expect our people to behave like the managers? What do we want them to do? The leaders, what they should do? With setting the expectations is one thing, so everyone knows what is expected from them. And one of your questions was like, do I have to convince? When there are expectations set, then I don't think I have to convince, but we have to talk about it a lot. When we do talk about diversity, first of all, we have to talk about being inclusive. Do we really make room for everyone? We know so many years we did talk about, lean in, try harder, jump higher. We just have to make room for everyone. And I would say it this way, we rehearsal every day making room for all diverse people. Doesn't matter then, is it then the thinking, the gender, the age, is it connected with accessibility? We learn to make room, and on the other hand, we build up the system in a way. If this room is not made, the people have somewhere to go and talk about it. Hey, I asked, I knocked, I did this, that, and third, and this is what I got in back. So it's like, at the same time, we do talk as well, stand up for yourself, speak up, say out. It's a lot of learning.
Yeah.
But yes, it has to be on the plate every day.
Okay, you mentioned something really interesting there about culture and about like having a culture that encourages more diverse ways of thinking and so on. And culture is something that tech has had a big problem with in terms of racism and sexism, like lots of scandals about sexual harassment, racism, big problem of women and people of color leaving jobs in tech and not even wanting to apply for them for that reason. Megan, you've worked in lots of different countries in the tech industry, lots of different types of working environments, and you also used to work on Xbox in a space gaming that is notorious for perhaps being the worst of this. How important is culture in terms of like, if you don't address the culture, is it actually possible to create more inclusive workspaces?
Yeah, I think culture is everything, actually. I was thinking about this morning as I was getting ready. When I joined Microsoft in the late 90s, there weren't very many women. I mean, that's an understatement. But I joined a great culture. I mean, my background is actually in linguistics, so I joined a computational linguistics team, which was Bill Gates's pet project at the time. And there was great diversity, actually. There were basically, it was 50-50 on the team, men and women. And I think that, I tell myself my own narrative about how I survived at Microsoft, and, you can be, if you're strong and you push yourself through. But actually, I think that it's because I landed in a culture that was welcoming to me. If I had landed immediately in a different part of the company at the time, I don't think I would have stayed in tech, actually, at all. It wasn't where I thought I was headed. It just happens that I felt great affinity for tech, and I enjoyed it, and I love the space still. But when I moved, when I left that organization and moved, then it was quite an awakening for me. The higher up you go, of course, as a woman, I think the higher up you go, and I don't know if it's the same for black men and women as well, but I assume the higher up you go, the sharper the elbows, right? The more the doors are closed against you, and definitely culture is a huge aspect of it. They did a study about why women were leaving tech. This is 10 years ago, why women were leaving tech. And then the women said the environment didn't feel good. They went to explore some of these offices, right? And it's whiskey bottles everywhere and foosball and, everybody walking around in kind of t-shirts and shorts and, posters on the wall that we wouldn't accept in other locations. You would never stay in a doctor's office that had that kind of vibe, right? And yet in tech, we're very proud of that vibe, this kind of party vibe. But actually the party vibe isn't really inclusive, actually. I think culture is everything, and it starts at the top. And companies who want to move the needle on diversity and inclusion and equity really have to face that. I mean, you have to give up a little bit of this maybe a little bit of this party atmosphere in order to get the best talent and provide the best opportunity for people. And I think that we have seen with COVID, for example, this great resignation, right, where people, women and people of color have, really resigned in big numbers and kind of set the progress back quite a ways. But the truth is, you don't leave an environment that feels supportive. You leave an environment that feels toxic.
Yeah.
And that has to change.
Yeah, and some of the details of how toxic it is are pretty horrifying. I mean, if you look at some of the scandals that have been going on in companies that maybe should remain nameless for legal reasons, but the levels of complaints about sexual harassment alone in some companies are really horrifying. I mean, Charnez, from a culture point of view, you work in an industry where, we already discussed how venture capital makes investment decisions that generally exclude people of color and women. But the people making those decisions are overwhelmingly white men as well.
Yeah.
What has been your experience of the culture as a black man in a very white industry?
Yeah, let's just say, I think Michael mentioned it yesterday on the panel as well, being the only person of color in the room is something which I experience. I think the diversity numbers which they're trying to get towards, it's okay, we've hired the person of color, we've hired some gender diverse, but the inclusivity as well, to be honest, at times I don't feel welcomed into the space. And then it's for me to put my hand up and voice my opinion, but still it's not yet that I feel completely welcomed. So yeah, and that's the culture of the venture capital space itself. But I think there are initiatives and there are some top funds who are really working towards changing this. Because they understand the value that really comes from having a diverse investment team. But it's not everybody yet that understands this. I think it's a case of they've had successes before, so it's well, I've done it before, so I'm just going to follow the same recipe. I see it as an opportunity we said, how do we frame the problem, right? The problem for me is something which is an opportunity. So yes, we've had unicorns, but think about how many more unicorns we could have in the future if we actually build for a totally inclusive product. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a really interesting point, but the idea of all the potential that is lost by all of the talented people who don't want to go into an industry or don't start a company or aren't able to. I mean, Lisu, in terms of recruiting people to work in Microsoft, your company has a commitment to hiring more women and making the workforce more diverse. How difficult do you find convincing people to hire more women in areas like programming and so on that are, at the moment, very dominated by men?
What we have done, we have built up a system and expectations or requirements, however you want to call them. Whenever the position opens or there is a open role, it has to be published internally, externally. It must be open certain time minimum. When we look at when we look for the most suitable candidates, we always make sure that, for example, in Europe, we have female candidates in. We never proceed if we don't have. And in US, we always make sure that we have diversity from ethnicity side. It is possible, and it might take longer because our diversity is higher already than women graduate STEM subjects. So we are ahead of the market, but whenever the manager says that, hey, I can't find anyone, no way I find, then the usual answer from HR side is start earlier, be patient, keep looking for. So this is the way how we do. And with this, we are successful in this one. Because more female you have in the organization, the more the good word about the inclusive culture spreads. That means people are more interested as well to come in and be part of that culture.
Something really interesting you said there about like being ahead of the market in terms of women graduates in STEM. Like, as a historian, it fascinates me that 40 years ago, computer science degree programs in the US, for example, were about 40% women students. Over the next 30 years, that number like more than halved to be only like 18%. So it's not like women choosing to study computer science and other STEM subjects actually went backwards rather than going forwards. And tech is a really interesting industry because in the 1950s, 60s, early days of programming, there were many very prominent women programmers. I mean, 2022, I think, is a big anniversary. It's the 70th anniversary of Grace Hopper's first seminal paper and 50th anniversary of Karen Spark-Jones's 1972 paper about computer languages. And those teams were full of women because programming was not something that was particularly lucrative. Once the tech industry became lucrative, the numbers dived because men basically took the opportunity. It was a hostile takeover by white men of the tech industry. Megan, what do you think that the industry needs to be doing and that society needs to be doing so that we do not have this enormous educational problem of women and girls not wanting to study science subjects because they feel that they're not for them?
I don't know if I have the answer to that question, to be honest. I think when I was still living in the US, I spent a lot of time participating in groups that did outreach to schools to give girls examples of technology and the kinds of jobs you can have. But I think actually, I even think that this narrative is a little bit stuck on STEM. And I think, as I said, my degree was in linguistics and literature, and I have had an amazing career in tech. And I think that it's a little bit of fallacy to say that you have to have a career in STEM. You have to start and feel good there in order to have a great career in technology. Because smart people can learn things, right? I mean, I hired thousands of engineers over the course of my life. And I don't think that the strongest engineers always come from STEM. I think that the strongest engineers are the ones who can move the needle for your business and whatever it happens to be, are the ones who ask interesting questions and who are curious about the world. And I don't think that that's particular to STEM. In fact, I would say that sometimes people who come from humanities have more this natural inclination to ask questions about things. So I think for hiring managers also, it's really, I was very lucky. As I said, I started when Bill Gates was still in the company, and his philosophy at the time was, we ship to everyone, we have to hire all kinds of people. That changed over the course of the time that I was working there. But, I think smart people can learn smart things. And if you get a candidate in front of you who has that spark, invest in that spark. Invest in that spark over the PhD who already has all the answers and isn't interested in trying new things. Because that person with that spark, there's a whole world behind that, right? And smart people can learn, coding languages are changing all the time, right? The tech stack du jour is not going to be the tech stack of tomorrow. So you don't need people who know this particular technology. You need people who are capable of learning, and that comes from everywhere. Yeah. So I would say, of course we need to continue to make, some countries do really well. I had a team in Ireland, and I was always amazed by the Irish office, the Irish Microsoft office, which was really, really well balanced. Actually, of course we can do better, but it's a much bigger. There are many ways to have this terrible expression. There are many ways to skin a cat, right? I mean, there are lots of ways to solve this problem, and if we stick to, we have to get more girls in STEM early on, then we are missing a whole range of opportunity to provide to girls and other underrepresented minorities who are really smart and are just need that opportunity to prove themselves in an environment where they are invested in and can grow.
Yeah, as a history graduate, I definitely agree with that, right? Yeah. Lisa, do you think that, do you feel that by hiring people from different academic backgrounds, you are able to find a more diverse pool of people to work?
Yeah, we do have people with a very diverse backgrounds. We have, I think even here, people who graduated German language, studied that one, and are now in the tech sector. I studied physics, I am HR. We have had someone who graduated arts, crafts, dancing. So, you made a very good point. Being open, being ready to study and learn, brave to do new things, take the opportunities. And when you look from the ICT side, we shouldn't be so narrow-minded and look for the diploma only, or what did you do, or do you program, or don't you program. Creating a product, it takes a lot of, it needs a lot of skill set. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that the only skill set is just coding.
That's very interesting. That idea of like being kind of closed-minded and just doing what you've done before. Charnez, you mentioned that before in venture capital, the idea that, well, we've made money before, we've funded unicorns before, so this is how it's done. And have you felt like that there is a pressure for your investment portfolio and also for you professionally to kind of conform to like the existing way that venture capital works? Like, is it hard to do something different?
No, I think it depends on the firm. So some firms follow a recipe which they've had success with before, but I think we're seeing more and more now to find outside of the box and 1,000x return opportunities. You need to not conform. Like that's my whole premise, right? Like that's my thesis when I'm looking for founders. I'm looking to founders who think differently. Sometimes I'm looking for founders who was a historian or a social science major. I think we need those people to become founders as well. So when I'm looking for founders and like how do we create a more inclusive space in tech, I think it's also looking towards these founders who think differently, because they will create the next massive Microsofts and Facebooks of the world. And so then that's one way. So when I start, because I invest at pre-seed and seed stage, which is super early, and so I'm looking for those founders who already from the beginning understand that to build amazing products, they need to think globally, they need to think inclusive. Because that's the guys who are going to build the next amazing products which we've never seen before. Yeah. So as a venture capitalist, my job is to find those guys who are not conforming. And sometimes sadly in venture capital I see people following trends too much. But you need to be outside of the box. So I'm looking for those outside of the box founders who understand the value of inclusivity, who understand that in order to create the next groundbreaking product, they need to think differently. So I think venture capital, that's existential, that you need to not conform in order to be successful.
Coming from Africa, which is a space where there's obviously huge opportunities for future growth and things like venture capital and tech, do you feel that there is an opportunity to not repeat some of the same mistakes, in the sense that Megan mentioned earlier, the way that some of the toxic problems in the tech industry, like racism, for example, get coded into certain products that then have a social knock-on, like this AI problem, where it's become it's being enabling greater institutional racism through the product. Do you think that venture capital has a responsibility, because there is an opportunity there to have a greater social impact by not just replicating the same types of founders and same types of companies?
Yeah, no, I think so. In Africa in particular, I think we need to learn the lessons which were sort of learned here in Europe, and not sort of just replicate the model which is in Europe and in the US, because there is an opportunity, because Africa is this blank canvas. And so the capital who allocates, if we're still allocating on the same closed-minded premise, it's not going to fit for the continent, and then we're going to get the wrong products, the wrong algorithms, which are going to be biased and discriminatory. So it's important that the venture capital and the allocators on the continent as well come and learn the lessons which have been learned here in Europe. And so when we invest into Africa, the way Africa develops going forward, affects the way the whole world develops going forward, I believe. So it's important that we can right sort of some of the wrongs which were made and sort of move forward in a more positive manner, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting, that idea of affecting the whole world, because tech does affect the whole world, right? It's the cutting edge at the moment. It's the industry that has the capacity to change things. It's the one that is most politically relevant. It's the one that is to do with public debate and everything. And something that I found kind of a little bit depressing hearing the last couple of days, and Lisa, you and Megan both mentioned this as well, this idea that often when this issue is discussed, we hear some reassuring sort of just keep trying, keep plugging away, don't get disheartened, it may be difficult, lean in, you can do it, etc., etc. The scale of the problem is so large and the progress is so slow that I don't know, it reminds me of, Charnez, you're from South Africa, I'm always struck by the motto of the South African rugby team, that they have only one way of playing, which is you do plan A. If plan A doesn't work, you do plan A harder. Yeah. Plan A is not really working very fast, And if we're talking about an industry that has such an enormous social and political and economic impact, well, rather than keep trying, Megan, like, do we need to just kind of blow some stuff up? Like, does there need to be like radical systematic change here? Like, do we need a revolution rather than just this kind of incremental change?
It feels that way. I mean, it feels that way because we're making incremental change, but it's so slow. I mean, it's so slow. Estonia, for example, has great examples of female founders, and yet it still has the second highest pay gap in Europe. It's higher than other countries that you would expect to be higher on that list. I mean, I think that we need a radical change. I mean, we're talking about an industry that has so much money and political power wrapped up within it. That unless we decide to do something really, fundamentally different, I know we hate this idea of quotas, but actually quotas work, right? I mean, I look even at Microsoft. I left Microsoft about 7 years ago, but I look at the change the company has made since then, and I don't think that change would have happened if Satya hadn't gone on stage at Grace Hoppers and, completely answered the question improperly, and I think that was like a really pivotal moment for tech and for the company of Microsoft itself. But I think it's important that we have those moments and we use those moments to move forward. I think we need things like quotas. I think that, if I look to rooms like this, I mean, it's not the people who come to these talks, which it's wonderful when we have people come to these talks, but the people who come to these talks are not the people that need to be convinced. Right? It's the same as every problem we have in technology, right? The great managers are the ones that show up for management training, not the crappy managers, right? And I think, we need, sometimes you need a hammer. Sometimes you need a hammer. It has to be, that the investors are requiring diversity from day one in the companies. Boards are forced to diversify. It's not enough to have one woman or one person of color on the board. You need two. That's where the critical change starts to happen, because inclusion is not the same as letting someone in the door. Someone in the door doesn't mean that you're actually now listening to their input. I think, it needs to come from, publicly traded companies need to be held responsible for hitting diversity numbers. We have seen that there have been movements in this direction, but for example, the state of California, which passed this law in 2018 about board diversity, it just was struck down a couple of days ago. So it's like 2 steps forward, maybe 3 steps back. Yeah. But the lasting change of things like quotas and enforced diversity, means that you are creating an environment where people who wouldn't normally get opportunity are getting opportunity, and then once they're in the door, creating an environment where they can do their best work, and great things will happen, because it's not just about hiring. It's about hiring and then promoting from within and creating the opportunity and listening to the other voices in the room. And I do think that we have to blow some stuff up, yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I think we need to blow some stuff up too. We've had some interesting questions from people in the audience. Also, somebody writing me a message in Irish, which is quite nice. Níl I'm sure So we obviously have another Irish speaker in the audience, which is quite cool. That means the weather's not so terrible today, which is a very Irish way of looking at things. One of the questions here from Maria is, we can see in employer marketing that companies use their token hires, but actually don't believe in diversity. What are your thoughts on that? So this is this idea of like a decorative diversity. You find the one success story and then everything's fine. Charnez, do you feel that sometimes is used? You were saying earlier about like the way that sometimes you feel that people in VC think of like investing in a black founder or something as a like charity almost. Yeah. Like, do you think that there's a problem with this decorative diversity idea of like finding one success story? And
No, I think it's a problem in the tech industry as well, in venture capital. Sort of the interesting thing is, like, if you're the only person of color at an organization, then diversity and inclusion, you'll run that policy. It's something that needs to be changed as well. I don't think that, again, like I said, people are chasing these numbers. It's like, oh, we are diverse. Like, look at our team. But then you got to look deeper into that, like what's the actual processes internally, like what's the decision-making frameworks which are happening. It's a problem which needs to be corrected. And as an investor, I try that with my founders to say from day one, how are you building forward? Not at your Series A or Series B, be thinking about diversity and inclusion and sustainability. Think day one, like how do I want to build this organization? When I'm going to be a unicorn, how's it going to look? Don't think of it as an after fact.
Because these are structural things, right? If you don't include it from the base, then the rest of it rots from the head. Yeah. But that, I mean, that's very interesting. That idea of like forcing people to think differently and like not just, you know, you mentioned quotas, Megan, and you mentioned, Lisu, this idea of like Microsoft won't proceed if you don't get like certain diverse applicants for a hiring process. Somebody told me last night that they had advertised for a job where they had 111 applicants and not one woman had applied for the job.
Hey, wait, if I may comment here. The way how pretty often the job ads are written in ICT, they don't talk with the females. So what we have done, we have just taught our managers to write inclusive job ads. And at the same time, when I look at our global talent acquisition team, this is diverse. It's not one age, one color, one race, one nationality. It's a diverse team that is hiring, and that helps them to look more diverse candidates as well. So I would say even we have to write the ads in an inclusive way, because if I don't like the invite to the party, am I going there? No.
Yeah, that's actually something that, having worked, Dan mentioned before that I worked on these issues in academia and higher education, and that was something that has been proven time and again there, that job ads written in certain ways almost deter female candidates and candidates
the
of color.
picture that is like so biased that you can't even think about it.
Yeah. And that like those kind of small changes can make an enormous impact in terms of what people are doing. Somebody also mentions in the questions the idea of, you know, we were saying about blowing things up. Look at the US soccer equal pay deal, it took a revolution. So this is something that I find quite interesting, is like when you make a radical decision like quotas, for example. Lisa, what do you think about quotas? Like, do you think that they're taking a blunter approach like that, a radical approach like that can make a change? Or do you think that looking at it from the hiring level and the applicant level is better?
Me personally?
Yeah.
I tend to be more pro quotas. I would start from the educational system, perhaps. In Estonia, at least, we have a high number of female teachers. I would make sure that this environment is inclusive as well. Yes, I am like 70% pro.
Okay. Because I suppose you can't argue with a quota. There's something like you can...
I know. No. Quota should be even, what was my learning? I support a Norwegian team as well. And at some point I realized that I have never had to queue in the ladies' bathroom in Norway. And then one engineer told me, hey, do you know there is a quota? And I always queue whenever I go, maybe outside in Nordic, there's always a queue. Same number of the rooms for females and males, yes. Quota. That's why I said 70%. We have to put prey in between, you know, be reasonable, but yes.
Okay. Well,
Just one point on that. Interestingly, like at our fund, we don't have a quota, but because we've changed the structure of the investment team, like we have a diverse portfolio. And so in venture capital, we see that it shouldn't be like, oh, quota to get the investment side, but more if you change up the top layer of your team internally, you'll then get a more diverse portfolio. And similar to in tech, if you have a more diverse team, you'll have a more diverse product. And so,
Because I guess we're trying to get to a point where we don't need to keep having this discussion, right? Like
I don't want to have this.
We shouldn't have to be on stage here talking about how we get here, because it should be the way that it is. And I guess the question is, quotas may be a blunt tool, but you can make a lot of difference with a blunt tool in a short frame of time. Thank you, the three of you, so much for joining me on stage. I think this was a really interesting discussion, and hopefully we've inspired people to do some radical thinking and make some radical change. Thank you all for coming. I hope that you enjoyed our discussion, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. So thank you very much.